Okay, so we're ready to start now. This is a research students training session for IALS doctoral students on research ethics and data management. I'm Diamond Ashiagbor and I'm Professor of Law and Director of Research here at IALS, and I'm happy to be interviewing this afternoon Sandrine Alarçon-Symonds, who's Head of Management Information and Research Services at the School of Advanced Study. So I'll hand over to Sandrine to introduce herself, and then I want to ask some questions, issues that I know research students and scholars and research fellows at IALS have about the new SAS policy on research ethics. Thank you very much, Sandrine.
Thanks, Simon. So I'm Sandrine Alarçon-Symonds, Head of Management Information and Research Services. At the school, I also cover all the divisions within the University of London, and that includes Centre House Library, University of London Computer Centre, and ULIT, University of London Institute in Paris. Part of my remit is to oversee the policies and procedures in research ethics, and how any members of staff or fellows or students conduct their research within the ethical policies that we have at SAS.
Okay. So what was the main reason or motivation for constructing or revising this policy? Because obviously there was something in existence before, but there was, I understand, sort of a relaunch of this in May 2016. Could you explain what the purpose of that was?
The school protocols indicate that every 3 years all policies are reviewed. There was a major change within the research landscape on how research ethical implications should be looked at by researchers as well as institutions, and where responsibilities lie. And it's also in response to a lot of technical advancement and more innovative research projects, which involve a lot of human beings, of course, but a lot of different range of participants who take part in the research projects. So it was very clear from a school point of view, who has been doing interdisciplinary research for quite a long time, but to adapt those policies and procedures in line with how the research landscape was evolving. And it actually happened at the same time as the ESRC relaunched their own policies or expectations on how institutions were managing research ethical implications.
Yes. Okay, so one of the key parts of the SAS research ethics policy is that the ethics approval process, or the scrutiny of a researcher's proposed research by reference to ethics, should be in proportion to the risk of harm or adverse effect. So I think sometimes researchers are a bit worried that, why do I have to go through an ethics approval process? I'm not doing experiments on animals, I'm not interviewing vulnerable children. So could you explain a little bit about this idea of the level of scrutiny of the ethics of your research is in proportion to the risk of harm?
I think that from a research point of view, and I'll do the research point of view in the first instance, and then institutional point of view in the other instance. From a research point of view, you don't know whether there's actually a research ethical implication unless you've actually asked the appropriate question. And that's what we're trying to do at SAS, is actually have a long list of questions that you can ask yourself, and then provide a self-assessment on your own research. So it's not necessarily that research ethical implications are only focused on human participants. In an interview, for example, it's not only that, because you can actually have human participants through social media, through online surveys. You actually have no interaction with those people, but you're actually dealing with data that are related to human beings. In that respect, that's what I was talking about, that the development of technology allows interaction with human beings without them being in the same room. And that needs to be taken into account, and it also needs to be shown that such methodology has thoroughly been thought through. And then that's where I come out from the institutional point of view. We need to be able to know that the researcher has actually thought through of all those implications, ethical or not, that the research methodology will imply, and have the assurances that such a researcher is actually fully aware of the methodology of their research, to be able to guarantee and protect them, as well as protect the people who are interacting with the research.
In a way, thinking about research ethics should be embedded in your thinking about your methods and the approach you take to your research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you would want to organize a research project with those questions aside, definitely. Yes.
And so when you look at the research ethics policy, it uses language such as checklist and review. Could you say something a little bit about how that works?
Yes. So we have 3 documents. We have the research ethics policy and protocols, which is basically the school policy on how we expect researchers to deal with research ethical implications. The responsibilities of all members of SAS within that policy, and how the approval process takes place, and that covers the responsibility of the research office as well as the research ethics committee. So that's one document which people need to be aware of, and this is very much a document by which the research office works for all ethical implication and all ethical assessment that come through our office. Then there are 2 other documents. That's the self-assessment form, which is the self-check form, which is, you have this one here. That's the form. It's being slightly amended to add a couple of questions, but this form basically is a set of 2 parts. There's the first part, which is the usual normal questions that you would ask for in these circumstances, and from that form, once you've had 3 columns. You have yes, this is taken into account, or yes, for example, there's human beings taking part in that research, or no, there isn't, or I'm not sure. From answering those questions, then at the end of it, you have an assessment which covers 3 results, A, B, or C. A is when you actually have no ethical implication, and that's fantastic, sign it off, send it back to the research office, and the research office then reviews the assessment and confirms the results. If there's a B, that means that there are some ethical implications and we need more information about it. You actually have a second part within that assessment which needs to be filled in because we need more details. And that the result means that we recognize the ethical implications, but there's adequate arrangements to actually cover them, and the research in itself and its methodology does not need to go to the research ethics committee for formal approval. However, when it's a B, we always say we can come back to you if there's a problem, or if you do change your methodology, we need to know straight away. If it comes as a C, this will go straight away to the research ethics committee for approval. There are too many risks which cannot be adequately managed, or believed that cannot be adequately managed, and they go to the research ethics committee for formal approval. Now, this self-assessment list of questions, but also answers, and to help researchers see the context in which the question has been asked. Because sometimes we get answers like, well, I don't understand what that means. I don't understand what Data Protection Act means. What does that all imply? I don't understand what sensitive information is. So this checklist, which is a guidance, it tends to actually provide further information on the type of questions that are being asked. So it's really meant to support the researcher when going through that self-assessment. We are putting further information on sensitive material because it's coming more and more and it's very much a topical issue. So this is something that we're looking into. There's also the question of how to safeguard and back up the data and where it is and this kind of thing. So we're providing further information on that. The policy has been in place since March, so we're still going through the motions, but it's very much there to help researchers put themselves in a situation whereby all the questions are being asked for them. We're trying to cover as much ground as possible on all the subjects that are covered here, and this should be applicable to all research projects. So we're trying to be as comprehensive as possible.
That's really helpful. Can I have that? So if I think of the sort of wide variety of research that PhD students at IALS are engaged in, I'm sure you've found this already with researchers, research students, fellows. Most of the questions, the answers from researchers at IALS will lead to the A or B category, where there's sort of minimal intervention and you won't need to go to the Research Ethics Committee. So for example, questions will be on matters such as what's the subject matter of my research? Does it deal with controversial, contentious, sensitive, embarrassing or upsetting subject matter? Security sensitive information could be defined as research which is commissioned by the armed forces or involves the acquisition of security clearances, or research which concerns terrorists or extreme groups. So those sorts of questions, if your answer is yes, you're in the category where you will require to go through the next level of ethics scrutiny. Correct. So for example, questions such as, does research involve living human subjects recruited for that research? Will the study involve participants who are in any way vulnerable? So for example, interviewing prisoners or ex-offenders. Will the study require the cooperation of a gatekeeper for initial access to groups? So for example, if you need to get permission from the National Health Service in order to interview people who have received a certain medication, for example, will the study involve animals? So a lot of these areas won't actually apply to the research being done by scholars at IALS, but when they do, then the checklist will pretty much come out with the answer is, I've done enough to make sure that my research satisfies the ethics requirements of SAS. So what would you say so far when researchers within the SAS Institute have submitted the self-check forms? What results do you tend to get?
At the moment, we have a very high number of these. Yes. And that, which does reflect interdisciplinary activities across SAS. But one thing that I should make clear, even if the assessment is an A, we need to know that it's an A. We need to know that the process has taken place, because we're reporting on all research, not just the Bs and the Cs. And we do get a lot of freedom of information requests on how we manage our ethical assessments, and so it is important for us to have all that data there.
So in a way, one of the important things to take away from this discussion, it seems to me, is that reflecting on the ethical implications of one's research is something we should build into the design of our research project and our dissertation theses and so on, even if we're pretty confident at the beginning the answer is probably going to be you only need a light touch approach, because SAS as a whole needs to say majority of the research actually, we've checked all the research for its ethical implications. Most of it comes out at the end of that self-review process as only needing a light touch. But we do need everyone to think about the ethical implications of their research, because otherwise we won't know.
No. And I mean, the way we've built in those policies and protocols is meant to actually help the researcher within their own research methodology, within their own research approach. So it's very much because we wanted to engage with them and with their research to support them, because this is what we're here for, we're here to support them. And also it's very good experience to have, and it makes you think of something that you might not have thought of, or it maybe will make you think of a way in which you want to take your research and help you think of all the implications that will imply. So it's very much there to support researchers across or even beyond what the research ethical assessment is meant to be in the first instance.
I see that because on the website you also have sample forms such as a participant consent form, or a participant information form, or a template for conducting interviews. So it's actually quite practically helpful. And in addition, the questionnaire asks one to think about data management. So if you are interviewing people and you're recording the interviews on audio, some kind of digital audio, if the interviewees have said, I will speak to you but only off the record, then you need to find some way of keeping the record of that interview in a way which anonymizes that information you've acquired. So what's helpful about these ethical approval processes, the checklist requires you to think about your data management processes. How will you store the data in such a way that it's secure and it doesn't give away confidentiality if it is the case that the interviewee required confidentiality and anonymity. So it's just a helpful, practical support actually for one's research as well. Okay. Are there any other aspects of the research ethics policy and practice that you wanted to just highlight?
I think because I was talking about researchers in general, but we're talking about students. The supervisors are there to support all students throughout the process. So it is absolutely important, and the form actually does emphasize that you have actually discussed the research with your supervisor or supervisors, sometimes you have more than one, and making sure that you're both you're all in agreement with the answers that are then provided. There's also the support of the research office. If there is any question on a particular question, and say, well, actually, I don't understand what the Data Protection Act means, or Freedom of Information Act, for example. What are the implications really for my research? Where can I store my data? How can I manage my data? I am going to anonymize it, but do I really need to have a consent form? Yes, you do. So all of these things there, if you have any doubt, just ask for support or advice from the supervisors or from the research office.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Sandrine. That was really helpful. Thank you.
I hope so.